One of the hazards of all of us coming together like we did not have a coordination. So you're going to see a few differences in some of the numbers that we have. I just saw on Thaddeus' slide 44 million bushels of grain. And it's on your slide, it's a typical year. This last year, and I call the year ending May 31st, just prior to wheat season, 64 million tons went through the Newt Graham lock. So that's grain that came out of Oklahoma and Kansas and a little bit out of Missouri. So,
now, wait a minute. That wasn't sure just Kansas production numbers?
Yes.
This is just Kansas production
okay,
numbers,
okay,
not Kansas and Oklahoma and Missouri.
very good. Okay. One of the problems that I thought about today, as Thaddeus asked me to come up here, was that I moved from Indiana 9 months ago. And I look at this room and I look at the experience in this room and I thought, man, what can a guy from Indiana come here and tell you about your industry and the impact of the MKARNS on Kansas? And I'm thinking, wow, there's not much I can add. So what can I bring? Well, maybe a new set of eyes, a different way of looking at things. So when you look at this tonnage, and this tonnage that's going into a section of navigable river that's not even in the state of Kansas, it made me think. And one of the things I looked at was protein and meat. So I'm thinking in 1969, so this is a year or two before the waterways officially opened, right? So that's why I went back to that year. In that time, meat consumption by the U.S. consumer was 189 pounds per person. And in 2017, I'm told it's about 216 pounds per person of U.S. consumption of meat. That's not much of a change. That's 14% over almost 50 years, all right? So meat consumption hasn't gone up in our country, but worldwide demand has increased a lot. Now, some of you might have a taste for sushi. I don't. Okay? But some people think it's a delicacy and they pay a lot of money for it in this country. Well, Southeast Asia has been eating sushi for centuries. And I think they've had their belly full. They got a taste of a Big Mac and said, you know what, we like beef. So Southeast Asia has been a big growth of protein diet that they weren't used to. And so that's been a big change. So the U.S. has responded to that by changing the way we farm. And in fact, in 1969, let's go one more slide. 1969, 1.1 million bushels of soybeans were produced in the U.S. And to meet this growing demand, 4.4 million bushels was produced this last year. That's a fourfold increase, 400%. So where did the increase come from? I got to look at Indiana because I got to put things in perspective. Let's go one more slide. So Indiana increased 300% in that time period, and Illinois, the largest soybean producing state in the country, went up 267%. Anybody have an idea what Kansas has done in that time period? If you do, I hope our numbers agree. Almost 1,000%. Next slide. Kansas went from 19 million bushels in 1969 to 189 this last year. 995%. That's huge. And I got to ask, why? The waterway doesn't even reach here. Okay, so now again, look at Indiana. The southern border of Indiana is the Ohio River. Give or take 340 miles of waterway. On that waterway, Consolidated, my company, has got terminals all along there. We've got one in Aurora, which is close to Cincinnati, the eastern end. We got one in the center, which is Jeffersonville, right across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. Big river port. Another big river port down at Mount Vernon. So that's at extreme ends of the state in the middle. We got one halfway in between Jeffersonville and Cincinnati, and we got another one between Louisville and Mount Vernon. So we got that border covered. The only place along the Ohio River that we don't have a terminal, there isn't any grain. There's trees. So of the state of Indiana has 92 counties, and I'm guessing we get grain from about a third of them. There's 102 counties, right, in Kansas, am I right? 105, okay. our company, and I can't speak for the world, but I can speak for our company. I'm going to tell you, in a typical year, we're going to buy grain, some of it a little, some of it a lot, from between 30 and 35 counties out of Kansas. A third of the state. A third of the producers and grain elevators are shipping grain to river terminals that isn't even in their state. Why would they do that? We talked about a little bit earlier about the economics of barge transportation versus truck transportation. So for us, it's going to the rivers because it's going to export, right? And so you got to combine the truck rate from this portion of Kansas to the ports, and then barge freight beyond. And then compare that to either truck rate all the way, which I didn't even look at what that would be, but compare it to rail traffic if you loaded in a rail car and went all the way to the Gulf. And it's going to change a little bit because freight rates change on rail cars, freight rates change on barges, seasonal changes, but we look at it at probably about a 40 cents per bushel difference to the farmer and or elevator. Basically, it's to the farmer because the elevator's passing it through to the farmer in Kansas.
Mike, what do you think, what would be the number one hope for you guys to increase the soybean grain going to the river for you?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What do you think would be something that could be done that would help increase the amount of grain coming to, would it be the drafts? So you can be more competitive?
Coming to the Arkansas River?
Yes.
More than it is even now.
The draft, would the drafts help change that substantially? That'd be a huge.
ADM would lower their damn truck rate and help probably more than anything.
Well, I don't know if Steve would want to hear this or not, but I think this is the truth. So Steve, if I'm wrong here, you won't be shy to correct me, will you? When you buy a barge freight, you're paying for minimum tonnage on that barge, okay? On a rake, I think we pay 1,400 ton minimum. That we're paying for it whether we fill it or not. And a box barge, we're paying for 1,600 tons whether we fill it or not. So every ton above that, we're paying for the tonnage, but the towboat operator, he's moving the barge for the same rate. So he's got 12 barges in a tow, and there's let's say they're all boxes, so they're all 60. He's moving that for a fixed amount of money. But now you're adding 450 tons per barge onto that tow, and he's not charging the owner of the barge any more money. So there's an efficiency there. So what does that do? I think that this creates competition for towing on the Arkansas. And what does competition generally do? It brings down prices, right? And so if you look at tonnage coming off the Ohio or Upper Miss or the Arkansas, does the Arkansas then get a freight advantage that makes that grain cheaper to the Gulf coming out of Kansas than it does out of Seymour, Indiana?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with it is, you know, like we load a barge to St. Louis for ADM.
Yeah.
South. And then we try to load a barge on the Arkansas to go south. We get less, we're unable to compete with that St. Louis terminal.
Yeah.
Because two things happen, freight values are more than too much. And then the second thing, a 12-foot barge is worth more than NOLA.
Right, right. So then you're looking at the trucking of freight from Kansas to St. Louis versus the freight rate down the Arkansas, right?
Gotcha.
Okay.
I'm not gonna correct you on that, but we probably need to have a conversation when we're drinking.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the why the soybean productions come up and how Kansas has responded to that. Okay. I said it's about 40 cents a bushel. Last thing I want to do. So I don't know if the state of Kansas has done a study on this, and there's been a lot of numbers put out, and I don't know who put them out or who gathered them or not. But what I can tell you is this. I don't need a study. I'm a pretty simple guy. If our consumption, our domestic consumption hasn't changed by looking at our meat demand, this excess production is going to the Gulf. It is going to export. this portion of Kansas is somewhere, and we can argue about the number a little bit, but it's somewhere in a 40 cent per bushel advantage. And we got an idea on the tonnage, and I got to ask, would the producers and elevators in this portion of Kansas do something that wasn't in their economic best interest? I don't think so. That's all I got. Thank you for your time.
Anybody have any questions for him?
No questions. I will say this, as I thought about this, and I wasn't planning on it, so Dee Dee, you can smack me if you want, but when I look at other rivers that have issues to deal with, it would be easy for Arkansas to go to, say, the Army Corps and say, let's fix this lock. Well, it needs to be done for economic reasons, but could it also be for job creation and things in Arkansas? It could be selfish. I'm not saying it is, but it could look that way. And the same thing for Oklahoma, for fixing a lock or something, spending money in Oklahoma. Could it look that way? It could. But when Kansas comes in, it looks purely like when they, to me, they look like the linchpin. By combining with these other states, to the Army Corps, they have no selfish reason for this other than it's good economically for their state. That's just what it looks like to a simple guy kind of new to the area.